Smart Podcast, back again at the Upright Digital Studios, the lounge, as it were. This week, we're talking with a Bill Austin, Daniel Energy Partner. So, Bill, thank you so much for taking time to come here and sit down and help us understand your journey to entrepreneurship and kind of your story.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This area is very familiar to me. This is honestly like not this office, but the larger office is where Daniel Energy Partners got its start. So it's a good place to talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, it's actually pretty interesting. You know, Josh was on the podcast. He was episode number 3, and he likes to say it's the best one.
Yeah,
and
of course he does.
I've got some statistics that might argue the point, but whatever. It was a good one. It was really good actually. And he talked about, and I remember when all of that was going on, you know, in 2020 with the pandemic and everything, and he talks about opening the office up to, you know, sort of an industry agnostic group of people and saying, just get out of the house.
Yeah.
Come down here and do something. And you know, I went back, and when I did some prep work for talking to you, I went back and listened to a few things, and the Oilfield 360 one, and where you guys talked extensively about just that. So it's kind of interesting to have almost a full circle type of thing where now I'm talking to somebody that their business did originate out of that sort of environment.
Yeah, I mean, that was a very, you know, obviously it was hard for a lot of different people in a lot of different ways, but you know, it's funny. John says it really well when he started Daniel Energy Partners, which was April of 2020. Mm-hmm. You know, he is somewhere right around that day that oil went negative 37. It's like so.
Probably the best time to start
but at the time
an oil-heavy company.
It also didn't seem like it was the best time. You know, like
right.
you're kind of sitting around thinking, oh my gosh, our industry in general is going away. Or you started believing what people were saying that our industry was going to go away.
Sure.
And, you know, you're kind of sitting here and saying, all right, well, we're going to start a business up in front of that, which was at the time very it was fun, but it was like, oh my gosh, you know, you come home every day, or you talk to my wife, and you know, it's like, well, is today the last day that you guys are going to be doing this? And there were a lot of days we thought it was the last day that we were going to be doing.
Are you guys done with this silly thing?
Yes. Are you going to go back to a regular job at soon? You know, and I think the answer there was never a day where it was going to be our last day,
right?
But throughout that time, it was really nice to have a place to go, but also, you know, between two people starting this business up, and then we added, we can talk about that. We added a lot more, or a few more. But like, we just kind of thought we were getting momentum. We knew it was going to be a slow start. We knew we weren't going to get a lot just right away, but it's still, once we got a little bit momentum, it was like, oh, okay, this is great.
Sure.
We're good to go now.
Sure, and we're definitely going to talk about all of that because it's very it's an interesting time to start a business, and remarkably, a lot of the entrepreneurs and people I've spoken with, even if they had existing businesses, also started additional businesses or started their core business during the pandemic. It was pretty. I think most of it was people sitting around going, "The F are we going to do now?"
Right.
You know, kind of thing. But it just sort of seems like it spawned a lot of really great innovation and thought.
Yeah, and look, again, it did, because a lot of people were bored, and they're like, well, when you think about, again, we talk about this too, but like risk, I mean, we were obviously taking a risk starting this business, but at the same time, like, no, there wasn't anything else going on, so I was like, well, why wouldn't we try this?
Sure.
Now's the time to do it, and it kind of worked out. Like, look, we started this business with an idea that we would do a lot, you know, research, consulting, pretty traditional, like very traditional, kind of like when you leave your job and you're sick of your boss, or whatever it is that you want to start. It was like, oh, okay, we'll just start a consulting business. And I know a lot of people who have done that. It's like, right. I'll put it on my resume as something that I did for 8 months or a year, and that's kind of, at first, that was, at least in my mind, kind of how it was going to go. And then it just kind of totally changed, you know, like 3 months in. It was like, no, we're going to actually build something.
Let's actually build a real business.
Us. Yeah.
So let's get there. But let's start out at the beginning. Where are you from, and what did you want to be when you were a little boy?
What did I want to be? I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up.
Yeah. That's a problem a lot of us have, man.
Yeah. And I like to say I'm from a bunch of different places, mostly Houston, but I was born in New York. My dad was in the energy business. And so in a lot of ways, he precedes me when I meet people in the energy and oil field services business, which is great. But at the same time, it's like, oh, they look at me and like, oh, you look just like somebody I know. I'm like, yeah, someone about 50 years older than, not 30 years older than me.
It turns out I
Yeah,
have a reason for that.
I do.
Yeah.
But for the most part, we moved around. Came from New York, moved down to Houston, moved back to New York, moved to St. Louis, and then ended up back here. But yeah, so I say I'm from a lot of different places, but mostly Houston. I went to undergrad in upstate New York. I went to Colgate. Ended up for about 10 years after undergrad in New York as an investment banker. And then moved down here and joined an oilfield services company to do a little bit of everything. It was Key Energy Services. Worked for now their CEO, Marshall Dodson, and just did a bunch of different things. And from there, realized I liked the deal aspect of the world. So my investment banking days like kind of stuck with me, and moved over to Cameron and was in the M&A group at Cameron for about 5 years, which is great. Like that company was one of the companies that, like, at least in my mind, was just a great example of the oilfield services growing to like a really solid size, international operations, great people all over the world. And you kind of looked at it like, oh, I really like the way that this company was built up, the way that people treat each other, and the business that they conduct all over the world. That was just a fantastic place to work. And I learned a ton from all these different people that I got to interact with.
Yeah, I think that's important too. As I've gone along in my career, I realized that things when I was in my 20s that I learned that I thought at the time, that's pointless.
Yeah.
Now that I'm in my late 40s, I'm like, oh, now I understand how that relates and why that was important for me to store away. And I was really, I was pleased with myself that I was managed to somehow hang on to that.
Well, and it's interesting, at least in my career, I start off again in investment banking. There's not a lot of good managers in investment banking. They're pretty awful to their employees. There's a lot of different things that happen in there, and I learned a lot about how not to treat people,
right, how you didn't want to,
and like a ton of smart people, a ton of really good at that thing. But you also learned how not to treat people in certain ways. And then you moved. When I ended up at Cameron, I had a little bit more just kind of visibility as to the way the world worked. And I was like, oh, this is how like successful managers do things, or successful companies have these processes in place, or that are large enough. And you're like, oh, that makes a lot more sense now.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So when you were growing up in New York, between New York and Houston and St. Louis,
yep.
Which one did you like the best?
Oh, I really enjoyed being in New York. That's why I went back up to go to school up there. I mean, again, now I liked being in Houston because all these where I am in my life now.
Right.
I loved New York in a lot of different ways. St. Louis was great because I went to high school there. I met so many really good people.
Sure.
But it's probably between New York and Houston I really liked the most.
Houston's tough to beat. Honestly, I've never been to New York, which is kind of interesting. I've been all over. I've been to the state of New York.
Yep.
But generally in the the southern part of the state, around that area. But man, beautiful.
Right.
It's beautiful there. And I remember the first time I went to that part of the world, being native Texan, I thought it's gonna be gross. It's gonna be, steel and industrial and dirty. I was like, oh, this may be the most beautiful place I've ever seen.
Yeah, look, New York City versus the rest of the state, it's like totally different.
Correct.
It's like two completely different areas, and they treat it. The people that live in each part kind of treat it as such. I went to school in upstate New York, or central New York is actually more correct. And I learned about being cold. I mean, Colgate gets a lot of snow. The gray kind of sets in somewhere in October and doesn't let up until somewhere in like May.
Pretty monochrome for a lot of months.
Yeah, a lot of snow, a lot of rain, a lot of like days at like 38 degrees and like spitting rain, which is terrible. But the summers and fall up until October there, it's gorgeous.
Sure.
It's like the best area, and it's 5 hours from New York City. I loved going to school there, but there were days in mid-January when you just got back to school and you're like, oh my gosh, is the snow ever going to leave?
Sure. So you graduate from Colgate with a undergrad in what?
Economics and history. So,
and from there you said, man, I'm gonna go into the world of finance. And did you have any inkling at all that, man, at some point I want to do my own thing, or did you come out of college thinking, man, I'm going to get a great job in finance, I'm going to figure that out, I'm going to rise through the ranks of that? Was that the plan, or did you in the back of your mind ever have like, man, I'm going to do my own thing at some point?
I would definitely say that I was on the path, just the very straightforward, okay, you get the investment banking analyst job, you learn something there, you move on to the next thing. I wouldn't say that I was like super risk averse, but it was very much like, you do this, you learn something, you move on to the next thing. Maybe you end up working at a larger company and getting to be a senior manager in terms of like managing people, managing business, and kind of so on and so forth. Like, I would definitely say the entrepreneurial journey was not part, like I never looked at those guys. So I graduated in 2000, which was right in the middle of that, that first .com bubble.
Sure.
And tons of my friends went to San Francisco and to all these different places to work on that type of stuff. And I was like, no, I am going, to this straightforward path. And there was part of me that said, oh man, I should have taken that risk then, but I don't think I would have learned the same things that I've learned, which has helped me tremendously in my career
at this point. So
yeah, at this point.
So you did the investment banking finance side of it.
Yep.
For how long?
So it was almost 10 years that I did that, which there were times I loved it. And there were times that, you're up to far too late at night, trying to do something that means far too little to everybody. But I did that for about 10 years.
And then after that, where did you go?
So that was when I came down to Houston and ended up working at Key Energy Services. And
how do you make that transition from working in the investment banking finance world in New York to going into oil field services in Houston, Texas? That's quite the transition.
It is, but I had covered a bunch of oil field service businesses. Like, I wasn't far away from the energy world and banking. Like, I had done a bunch of deals for both services, for E&P companies, so that world wasn't that distant from me. And I did always know that I wanted to move from banking and kind of work on the corporate side, own the deals that we were working on, own a little bit of that finance, and be a bigger part of something. That had always been kind of my next goal. It's like, okay, you do banking, you learn a lot about how to, on the finance side of the business. And then, maybe you can work as a GM of a business and then move on to the COO, CEO, CFO kind of level of things. So when I moved to Key, that was kind of my thought process. And Key's a great company, but I wore so many different hats.
Sure.
And that's
welcome to oilfield services.
And so that was actually where I met John. So John had left to go to Simmons, and I was probably John Daniel.
Yeah.
And so I was probably he'd probably been gone, maybe it wasn't even 6 months. And Marshall was the treasurer at the time, and Marshall's now the CEO of Key. And I was like, I need to know what I need to do for this job. And he's like, you know what you need to do? You need to call John. He'll tell you, because I don't even know. And so that's really where I started talking to him, which has now been, so that was 2009. And so I've known him since then. And so I would just call him. He's like, okay, talk to this person, talk to that person, do this, do that. And that's kind of how we started off, just getting to know each other.
Outstanding. So really going back, it looks like you came out of college going into investment banking finance with the ultimate goal of progressing through there and then using that knowledge to then go into the corporate side of things, right, to help leverage that knowledge into helping them with finance.
Right, exactly.
Stuff, right?
Yeah, again, I guess my goal was to be the CFO of a company, sure, at some point. That was kind of like what was in my mind.
And so you start at Key. What was your first role at Key?
So again, I don't even know if I think I was manager of, I forget what it was, but it was basically I had part of corporate development, I had part of investor relations, I had part of treasury, I had part of just kind of FP&A. So it was a great job because literally every day was different. It was like, okay, today I need you to go help do this, and then I kind of got when I started, it was like, oh, someone's kind of telling me where to go, and then probably midway through, it was like, oh, I know that today we need to do this, or tomorrow I need to do that. And it was, again, so 2009, so we're just getting out of the crash in oilfield service. Like everything had, kind of fallen apart.
2008-ish was terrible.
But like 2009, oilfield services is doing much better. Key is in a really good spot. So there are always kind of good problems to have. It wasn't the bad problems like, oh man, this is a really hard and tough decision that you have to make. It was always kind of like good, interesting things going on, making acquisitions, divesting businesses. And so it was a lot of fun.
I would imagine at that time too, because I was at Neighbors in 2008.
Okay.
And so not unique, right?
Right.
We were going through the exact same stuff. I left in 2010. So I went through the 2008 state. I was very fortunate. I didn't get caught up in the layoffs and those types of things that so many did. But when you came out of that, especially on your side of the business, I imagine there were a lot of small service companies out there that were looking to have some help thrown their way, and you guys could pick up equipment and grow and those types of things at a reasonable rate.
Right. Oh no, there was always and I liked deals. I still do. There was always interesting things going on. And again, smaller companies, again, oilfield service is full of all these small companies which are doing great things, but maybe need to grow a little bit or want to be public. And so Key was a great place to look at all that kind of stuff too.
Outstanding. So how long were you with Key?
So I was with Key for about 3 years. I left in the 2011 and I think it was end of 2011. All these kind of like start melding into one.
That's right.
Unless I'm looking at the exact dates that I was there, it's somewhere in there that I left.
So 2011, 2012, you leave Key, and then what?
So that is when I joined Cameron in the M&A group at Cameron. And so
is Cameron's growth model growth by acquisition? Is that how they kind of grow? What is
they were well. So Cameron's story, they had basically been spun off from Cooper Industries probably like late 90s, early 2000s. And they had done acquisitions, but it wasn't like, hey, you just add on things all the time. They had kind of built this business out of that spinoff. They had added things here and there, but it wasn't like, well, when I ended up at Forum, that was very much all right, keep adding on, bolt on all these things to grow. It was at a good size, but they always knew, hey, we need a different product line. We need to do a little bit here and there to add on to, what was already a pretty big company.
Sure. So you go to Cameron, M&A group.
Yep.
And so how did that go? Were you able then to, what did you learn out of that you hadn't known previous? I mean, obviously you had a lot of finance experience and touched a lot of different areas, and some of that was probably some M&A. I keep saying MMA.
Yeah.
That'd be an amazing group to have inside of a company. But M&A stuff, when you were at Key, you probably touched some of that there. What did you, when you got to Cameron, when you're dealing now with a large company, not that Key's small, but Cameron's definitely bigger. And what did you learn there that you were like, oh wow, I'm surprised that that's a thing?
Well, I think it was a lot more on the process of both of the manufacturing process and the process of M&A. Like I always knew it, banking, I had done all that kind of stuff, but being in an actual company where you had to really follow a process, follow a timeline, follow all these things, I learned a lot about that. They had already had a really good playbook. Cameron was very well known for bringing in Harvard MBA guys right out of MBA, putting them in the M&A group, and then spinning them off to help manage businesses. So there was a really good talent pipeline that were always coming through with new ideas, but at the same time, they had these guardrails up. It's like, no, this is the way we do things. And it very solid way of doing things. And so you saw all of the C-level people. Like, I was on the executive level, so you see Jack Moore, you'd see Chuck Sledge, there was the CFO and the CEO and CFO at the time. You saw the way they conducted business. All of the managers of each of the business lines would be up on that floor all the time, talking about their businesses, presenting to the. So you got to see a lot of that. You're just kind of like osmosis. You get to see like how good managers did things, how bad managers did things, good businesses that made sense. You're like, oh, because you get to see all the numbers too. So you were definitely, or I was definitely able to see a lot of really great stuff at that point, and again, you also saw the way that they managed people. A very collegial environment, but competitive. People were always trying to do well, but they really, for the most part, really supported each other. And you're like, gosh, it's a $12 billion business. And, with operations in Singapore and, up in Red Deer in Canada and down in Argentina. It's like, there's a pretty diverse group of businesses, but there's a very good way of doing that. There was a Cameron way of doing business, and people stuck to it pretty well.
What an amazing culture too. When you think about like, obviously in that environment, everyone has ego.
Yeah.
And everyone is, everyone's ego is important to them.
Yep.
But it's interesting to be able to create a culture, and that's what everyone's looking for. I think it's be able to create a culture where that your individual ego doesn't override the overall goal of the company, and that's an amazing culture if you can create it.
Yeah, and look, don't forget, like, Cameron's, over 100 years at that point, probably not over, but like, it is a large company that has taken almost generations of managers and of leaders to create that, and that takes time. And it's, again, smaller businesses, you can see how the ego can come in, but like that, again, that $12 billion, like, you've got processes in place. You've got people that can act on their own, but they're not going to do any, they're empowered to do enough, but not so much that can bring down, a company.
Right. So at that point, are you still, man, this is my path. I'm going to keep working CFO, CEO. You're not even thinking at this point, hey, I could take all of this information, all these things that I'm learning, all this thing that I'm doing, and you're not, at this point, you're not saying I've bolted all of this stuff on. I could definitely start a business.
No, if anything, I became even that is really when I became more risk averse. So I was at Cameron, and I got an opportunity to move to Honeywell to join their M&A team. So I was like, man, I need to get out of oilfield services. Like, this is too crazy. I can't. So even moving further away on the risk profile to a big industrial company where it's like, man, you keep that ship sailing straight. That is what they care about. They want, 2 to 3 to 5% growth. Like, none of this like wild swings like oilfield services. I quickly realized when I went to Honeywell that I did not belong in a place like that. That is like, you put on your, not necessarily even blinders, like, you do your job, you do what is expected of you. You can go above and beyond, but like, you start stepping in other people's sandboxes or wearing a bunch of different hats, that is not a good thing to do. I quickly realized that there. And again, so you move from what I would consider a big company to a enormous company.
Right.
Hundreds of billions of dollars in market cap, hundreds of thousands of employees all over the world.
Right.
And that is where they won't allow an ego to get in the way of that business going for, like, you need to be very good at processes. You need to be very good at like following the Honeywell way, which they basically they've almost codified at this point. Like, and look, there are a ton of very smart people there that know exactly, but they make sure that everything fits into these, and that was really apparent to me that is not the way that I think about the world.
Yeah, interesting. I'd been in oil and gas services my entire life. I was born and raised in Midland, so that's just what you do.
Right.
And I jumped out of it for a brief period, about a year and a half, and got into the tech sector. I had a buddy that had a company that was just past startup phase. They'd taken some. Yeah. They were doing well, and he sold it for a boatload of cash after I left. But anyway, I just remember getting out of that, and I had a conversation with a friend of mine that was a CEO of an oil company, a guy named Eric Waller, MD America's CEO up in Fort Worth for a period of time. And he said, don't worry, your skill set will translate. I promise you. And I was like, oh, man, I don't know. It's the first time out of it. He said, trust me. I got over there and, to your point, realized these aren't my people.
Well, that's another thing,
not
too.
That they're, not that they're not good people. You know, they're hard workers. They understand their business. They know what they're doing. But the oil and gas, and especially oil and gas services, operates on a different frequency. So I got over there, and I would the story I like to tell is, you'd go to them and you'd say, hey, the customer, one of our large enterprise customers, wants this particular widget on the dashboard.
Right.
And the developer would be like, yeah, we can have that in 3 months. I said, now, I'm going to tell the customer that.
Yeah.
Now, tell them that. And in 3 months, if you don't, it's a problem. In 3 months come around, it's going to be another 2 months.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, man, that doesn't work.
Right.
And so I get that frustration where you get into a situation and you're like, this is really, I mean, I could do this for X number of years, but not for me. So you get over to Honeywell, you realize real quick, sort of a round peg, square hole scenario. Then what?
So then I got pulled right back into oilfield services. That's when I joined Forum.
Interesting choice of words, pulled back in.
You're like, it's the Michael Corleone thing.
I'm
it's
back
like,
in.
Yeah.
Every time I try to get out.
Yeah, they keep pulling me back in. And so I think... So I joined Forum, and again, so there I was head of the M&A group. But again, it's a small enough company where you're wearing a bunch of different hats. So eventually became corporate development, investor relations, treasury, kind of full circle back to key. But I was, in charge of these things at that point. And I think that's really where I started at least thinking more about the entrepreneur, like being able to do something on my own, or thinking more along the lines of, look at this little business here. I need to talk to people about finding ways pull some capital together, buy this, and then run it and do something with it. And that's a very typical oilfield services way of looking at the world. Countless numbers of friends who have done exactly that, and it's either gone extremely well or not so well. But you also, being open, I think, to doing that was at Forum. I started seeing that a lot more.
Was there some sort of a catalyst that created that in you, or was it just the fact that you were there and you were like, man, I could do this?
It's a lot more of the I could do this. A lot more, again, you see a lot of deals when you're the M&A guy, and you're like, man, that business, they're doing a horrible job of running it, or they're doing a great job of running it, and like you said, I can do that too.
Yeah.
So I think it's just, again, seeing it all constantly, you're like, gosh, I really need to be more open to being involved in something like that.
What do you think was holding you back even at that point, or was anything?
I mean, I think it's a lot of things were holding me back. It's like you've got a family. You start thinking about that type of stuff. It's like, oh man, I am not prepared to take that level of risk when I feel like I'm on this trajectory that I've been thinking about for forever. And so I don't even let it enter your mind, because if you do, it's like you kind of start getting stir crazy. So at the end of the day, the catalyst is COVID that started this whole journey. It was like, well, all right, the Forum contracted, immediately. They're like, as we know, oilfield services wasn't exactly like hitting on all cylinders at the very beginning of 2020. Like we had that little head fake 2018, things are going better, and it's just kind of nothing was really that great.
2018 felt like, oh, we're on our way.
Right.
And then 2019, you were like, hey, what's happening?
That's right.
What is going on? And then you come out of 2019 and like all mentally ill oilfield service people, we're like, it's a new year, new me, here we go.
Right.
And then you're like, 2020 starts off and by March it's like, hey, the world shut down.
Right. Well, and it was before, so again, Forum was great because it's a smaller company, but we had and still has locations all over the world. And so beginning of 2020, I remember being in one of the QBR meetings, quarterly business review. Everyone's got their acronyms, right? And one of the guys that was in charge of the valves group, we had a big assembly test manufacturing facility in China, and we're in probably late January, and they were talking about how COVID was starting to be a problem or a big problem, and that no one was gonna go back to the factories or the manufacturing facilities, after the Lunar New Year. And you kind of looked around, and you're like, wait, what?
Yeah. Hold on a second. But supply chain, though.
Right. And you're kind of like, no. And I remember hearing so many people who on the ground, like, yeah, this is going to be a problem.
It's a thing, yeah.
It's a thing. And then other people be like, no, it's not a thing. We've seen this before. But it was late January, there were people in the United States, all over the world, that were like, this is a thing.
Yeah.
And then by mid-March, spring break, it's like, this is a real big thing now. And, the world's shutting down. Sure. Or at least the world in terms of the way that we view it in the United States, shutting down.
Absolutely. And so Forum sort of had insight into that because of their location over in China.
Yep.
They were very early.
I think early seeing it and maybe admitting that, man, this is going to affect our business, and not thinking that it was going to shut down. No one ever thought that it was going to take. Very few people in the world, I should say, ever thought it was going to take the turns that it did. But you could definitely see that it was going to significantly negatively affect businesses that had exposure in China, which is a lot of companies.
Yeah, almost all of them.
So whether or not the world was going to shut down wasn't the big issue. It was like, man, we said we were going to make, I'm just making numbers up here, 1,000 valves this month, and we're actually going to be able to complete 0. All right, that's a major problem.
Right. And also it may be 0 for a few months.
Right, because then you got to get ramped up, and then there's all these other issues. So there was definitely this is going to hurt our business, and that's separating all of the human stuff that obviously went on top of that.
Right. So you're at Forum.
Yep.
They contract
big time.
Starting when?
Literally, I want to say like days after the world, or
so
the United
February.
States. No, so mid-March.
Okay.
Somewhere in mid-March.
So mid-March they contract.
Yep.
Did you get caught up in that contraction?
Yeah, that was totally got caught up in that contraction, and it was like, look, we need to be in survival mode. The CFO is taking over all of this stuff, which is, it was kind of obvious at the time.
Sure.
Or not at the time. Looking back, it was obvious. At the time, it was like, man, this is terrible. And so there's your catalyst of being like, all right, now I need to do something.
Yeah. Now what?
Right.
Yeah.
Now what? Risk of wasting my time. Like, I'm not going to waste my time. Like, I don't have anything else to do. I'm not going around and interviewing for anything because no one's interviewing for anything.
You're not going around anywhere anyway.
Right. So I knew that John had already left Simmons because he left at the end of 2019, or really the beginning of 2020. And I called him. I was like, what's going on? And he's like, well, I'm starting this thing. You want to join me? I said, again, looked around.
Got nothing else going on?
Nothing else? Sure. Why not? So John started in April. I joined. I finally, it took a couple of weeks in there. I was like, man, am I really going to do this? I'm sure I've got other opportunities out there. And I joined in May. And that's really when, John had already done a lot of hard work getting it started. And then that's where we kind of just started sitting down and saying, all right, what do we want Daniel Energy Partners to be? And how are we going to make this work?
And so at this point, you're married.
Yep.
Do you have kids?
2 kids.
How old were they?
So now they're 12 and 9.
12 and 9. And so you go to your wife and you say, hey, here's what we're going to do.
Yeah. And she was like, okay, good, go. I don't want to hear from you. No, she obviously, she was very supportive, but at the same time, she was like, you need something to do. Otherwise you're going to go crazy. Like, we're all going to go crazy. So yeah, go for it.
Right. And at any point, when you guys, and like we talked about in the very beginning, and now we're kind of at that point again.
Yep.
It was funny the way you mentioned it. You said that your wife at some point was like, are you guys, when is this little cute game going to end? And what do you think, how long into the process were you where you started seeing sort of that, I wouldn't say doubt or
Yep.
lack of support, but just kind of like, hey, man, it's not a game, right? And the reason I ask is one of the big drivers that's kept me from ever really truly jumping out and being
Yep.
an entrepreneur is I've watched buddies of mine start businesses and just burn relationships down because they focus so much on the business, and that's a risk.
Right.
And that's something I know myself internally. That's how I would end up most likely being. How far through that process was it before you started noticing maybe some, like I said, not doubt or not supportive, but just kind of like, hey, man, shit or get off the pot kind of thing?
Well, I mean, I don't know if there was ever that like shit or get off the pot moment.
Right.
I think that I actually want to look at it from a more positive perspective, because I think we started this thing off. It was like, hey, we're going to do consulting, we're going to do research, we're going to go after all these people that don't do great research, and we've both got great Rolodexes that we can really start making this thing work. And I think that we also knew that we weren't going to get the same. We kind of thought we'd get more meetings. Like, remember, this is in the time where people are not even going out to go get coffee with you, right?
Right.
Like, we're in June, July of 2020. People are, even the most like people that are like, COVID, whatever, they're not really even doing like face-to-face meetings.
Yeah, I find it interesting. Actually, I have a theory that COVID allowed a lot of being able to keep salespeople and those types of meetings at arm's distance.
Totally.
It was a fantastic
Yeah.
reason not to, even if you believed what was happening or not.
Right.
It gave you a great reason.
Oh, you had to schedule a Zoom meeting with me, and I've only got these 30-minute time slots,
sorry,
and
man.
I'm sorry.
Go on my Calendly and see what you can find.
Well, and also it is, again, we can talk a lot about this, but oilfield services, especially, doesn't matter if you're doing the white collar or the blue collar piece of it. It is a face-to-face business.
100%.
It is, we'd have meetings on Zoom, and even some of our bigger supporters now, you knew that they were basically taking the meeting to go through, okay, I'm hearing what you guys are doing, great, but as you know, as a salesman, like you're trying to make an ask, you're trying to get something. They're like, I don't even want to hear the ask, I just want to know, and there's no action item after this meeting is over. It's just going to be over.
We're gonna look like we're doing things.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I would say, again, in that June, July, August, we were coming in here 3 days a week, spitballing, trying to figure out how to make this business work and what we were going to do. And just kind of like churning, but we were getting some support from people. We weren't getting paid anything, but we were getting some support from people. We were just figuring it out. And then really the time when it got better, we had two kind of moments. We did this interesting one. Josh will like this one too. So we did a cocktail party in Midland, like right near 4th of July. And, most of our clients or potential clients are in the Midland, in Houston and Midland area. So we were going back and forth. So we drive, John and I drive up there. David DeRode and Josh and Aaron Marquez, they hosted this cocktail party.
So I work for Wildcat.
Yeah. So we're in the Wildcat offices outside, have this nice cocktail party. We see a lot of the people. Again, this is early July, face to face, and we're like, all right.
Probably for the first time
right.
in a year, maybe.
We're actually getting, this is great.
Yeah.
And then we get home afterwards, and I don't know if it was Josh or David that called us. It was like, David's got COVID. And we're like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. So everyone at that party, like, you got John and I, you guys both sitting in our houses, just like kind of looking at our watches, like, okay, when am I going to get, like,
Sure.
when is it going to happen to me?
Sure.
It's just a matter of time. Thankfully, we didn't get anything, and David was totally fine. I think it ruined a trip that he was supposed to go on that I'm sure he's still mad about. But then, so we had that. We started getting a little bit of momentum, and then we were like, you know what? We actually need to see people. We're going to start doing these events. and no one else is doing them. This is how the oil field works, is seeing people face to face. And you know what? We're going to start doing events. Like, that's just what we're going to do.
This is still in 2020.
This is still 2020. And
Sure.
we're like, damn the torpedoes. We're going after
doing
it.
this.
And so we scheduled another trip to Midland in late August, early September. And again, went back to Aaron. Aaron has had this right near his office, that Basin Burger. And he's like, you guys can just go and have something in the parking lot at the Basin Burger. We're like, okay, fine. John brought a smoker up, and right around this time, we had been talking to Sean Mitchell, who's another one of our partners, to join us. And he was like, yeah, and I'll come up to the bar, I'll come out to Midland with you. And so we called everybody that we knew that was in the, Midland area or that might be around. And we're like, come to this. We're going to cook. We're just going to have a barbecue, have some drinks. Aaron's going to bring some flecha. We're going to make it happen. We probably had 50 people show up, or maybe even more than that. And I think that was really not necessarily the aha moment, but that was when we were like, okay, not the shit or get off the pot, but like, all right, now we're going to get some momentum. There was actually, and I tell this story a lot, there was actually the CEO of an oil field services company that we were talking to, and we told him to come, and he's like, okay, but I've got a real issue with these guys at Concho, so I'm going to be in Midland, and I've got to talk to him. We're like, well, there's going to be someone important from Concho at this thing. And he's like, okay, good. So he came, saw the guy from Concho. They resolved their issues that they were having face to face. And he comes over to John and he goes, how much are we paying you? And we're like, nothing. You're not paying us anything.
Right.
He goes, sign us up for the gold subscription. And we're like, all right, awesome. Now we realize that, again, bringing people together, making it an exclusive kind of event, but not something where they are, a services guy is calling on an E&P operator. If he's calling on him, it's a sales meeting. If he's at one of our things, it's a networking event.
Right.
And making it so that they can actually resolve issues at one of our events, perfect. And so,
and I think is to your point exactly how the oil business in general works.
Yeah.
But very, very much so, oil field services, that face-to-face interaction is important. I want to go back to something you said when you were kind of going through the starting, when you're in the starting blocks here, and you were talking about we were going to be in consulting and we were going to be in this and we were going to be in that. Did you, at that point, do you think that you were looking at more of a shotgun approach, and would you, if you had to do it again, would you refine that thought process rather than think we're going to do all these things?
No, I think that, we went into it again. I think I talked about it a little earlier. We kind of both thought of this as like, we had the ideas of what we were good at or what we could. The traditional thing that guys, when they left a big corporate job, was like, oh, I'm gonna do consulting, or I'm gonna do what I know how to do, and I'm just gonna do it under my own umbrella, under my own shingle. And that's where we started. I wouldn't change it, because I think that it took a lot of refining, a lot of like, hey, maybe this is what we should be doing. And I don't think, and if we had been more rifle shot, I don't think we would have been nearly as open to doing these events or doing the things that we're doing today. And John likes to say it, and we're a whiteboard, and we're open to anything. And we really were at that point. Like, Sean looked at us like we were crazy when we were thinking about these events things, but he was like, after you guys explained, he and John had a very long relationship, and he knew where John was going with it. But at the same time, he's like, it's 2020. What do you like? And as soon as we started talking about it, and as soon as he saw kind of the vision of what we were doing and that we were taking risks, he's like, I'm in, and I know exactly where he was like in immediately, like where we're going with this. And it's like, okay, perfect.
So that shotgun approach then sort of allowed you to try a bunch of things until you found sort of the right niche
Well, that
or niches, I guess.
yeah, that and also again just when you get a little momentum on something and you kind of go with it. It's like again, the events thing, we thought we were going to do it. We wanted to do it. 2020 makes things difficult to see people face to face, but we're like, if we get the second we got momentum with it, it was like, oh, all right, we're not getting momentum on these other things. Let's go with this. And again, with 2 to then 3 people, you can pivot like that all the time.
Right. And so this is 2020. You go, you say, hey, everything's closed. We're going to do events. Watch this.
Yep.
And then 2021 shows up. You decide we're going to throw a huge event.
So we decided that we were going to do Minute Maid Park with our Thrive Energy Conference, which is we're about to have our third. We had decided that right around that time of that barbecue.
Gotcha.
We had gone to the Astros and we had said, hey, we'd really like to do something centered around batting practice. We want to have this event at Minute Maid Park. And I don't think we had put money down at that point, but we were kind of like, we're doing this. And look, out of either sheer dumb luck or we just picked the right venue, Minute Maid Park can hold 50,000 people. And it was very much at that point in time where like you had to have events, you can only have like 3% capacity or 10%. Well, all right, in something that's 50,000 people,
That's
getting 800 people to it, like we have no problem with capacity constraints on that. And then we're like, yeah, we can open the roof too. So if
it's open air.
you know, so we had made that
brilliant, really.
We made, yeah. Again, as either really smart or we were just dumb and lucky, and it's always somewhere in between. We started going down that path, and again, being able to be here at offices like where you've got people like Josh, you've got people around you that you can kind of sound off on, and they can say it's a stupid idea and you're going to do it anyway, or they can say it's a stupid idea and you should change, or it's a great idea. That really got us going, and you know, we had the first Thrive conference in February of 2021.
Right. And I didn't go to that one. I went to the one in 22.
Yep.
I'm going to be going to the one coming up in 23. It is one of my favorites because I'm like, this is so unique to have it in the ballpark, and it's just it's very cool. And then when you look at the speaker lineup, you know, it's funny. Last year, I thought, I'm going to shoot my shot. So I think I sent a message to John on LinkedIn, and I was like, hey, if you have any speakers fall out, and he goes, thanks. And he was very, very nice. He's like, thanks. And I look at the speaker lineup, I'm like, well, that's a different breed there.
Yeah.
So probably not. It's amazing. And so, you know, being able to leverage the contacts and have those people, those types of executives there that the industry wants to hear from, man, is amazing.
Well, and look, the beauty of, again, all of our Rolodexes, asking people, again, that first year we had to ask a lot of favors of people, but they also saw what we were doing and they were like, just like you said, it's a unique event. Like, this is great. If any way that we can get our names out, because again, services and E&P in 2001 were still kind of like not very well thought of. Mm-hmm. And they knew that they needed an outlet, and we kind of were able to become that outlet for them.
That's awesome.
And so that's really where it grew out of. And people, you know, that first year were like, man, this is great. This is so different. And look who you have here. This is something that I want to support. And a lot of people have.
That's outstanding. Now, that's not to mention that and we'll get to the barbecue in Midland because that thing's blown up. But so you start off, you've got John, you grow by another person.
Yep.
Where are we at now? How big is the company now?
We're now at 6. So Sean joined in October of 2020. So we were 3 for a while, and then mid 2021 we added Bob Stanton, so with 4. Then we've added Jeff J at the beginning of the year last year to 5. And then now we've added Bill Herbert, who used to be at Simmons and Piper Sandler, as our 6th. So we now have 6 people as a part of the DEP team. And we always try to just, as we grow, add more bodies because we need them, but not outgrow anything. Again, we're concerned about content. We want all of this stuff, but we're also not going to just grow for the sake of growing.
Yeah, I've never understood that model either. So
Right.
Going back to that tech company, a lot
Yep.
of the tech model, at least when I was in that sector and the company I was with, I remember sitting in meetings where it was like, we need to get to 300 employees. And I was like, well, what if 100 people can do that?
Yeah.
And I just never understood. I never understood how that model translated to success. Like, we have this many people, that means we're successful. Like, that never made sense to me.
And look, we're also this kind of, I want to say we're a service company at the end of the day, and it is difficult for us at 3 and 4 and 5 people to say, all right, how can you bottle this and leverage it to grow? Because a lot of what we sell are ourselves. Like, we're not selling a widget, we're not selling a piece of software that you just need more people, and it's that next incremental sale is the margin increases because it's like easier to sell it. We are selling, and not a lot. I truly believe this. We sell ourselves when we go to a new client. They're like, they would not be a sponsor of one of our events or a subscriber to DEP unless they actually liked us in some way, shape, or form. One of us. And so that is hard to scale correctly. Whereas a tech company is like, no, we make this great service, SaaS or whatever.
Sure.
And your company needs it. They just
We'll
click
add
a button
bodies.
and we'll add bodies to help support that. Like, if we just did that and it turned out that employee 7, 8, 9 that Wildcat didn't like them and that hurt us, that would not be good. Like, that's the kind of thing that would make heads explode, at least in our group.
Right. And it would just, it could ultimately be catastrophic.
Right.
So how do you then, in that model, when you're looking at that from an entrepreneur perspective, how do you know, okay, it's time to add someone?
Well, this is a conversation we have a lot. I don't think you ever do know. I think, again, we have to hire people that fit with what we do and that we think would be additive to DEP and hopefully to our clients. We also, I think, have realized over the last couple of years, like, man, we need another body to help write or to help do back office stuff or to help sell. Like, I think we've been very lucky that when we've been close to breaking points, we're like, man, we need help, that people have either become available or we're like, oh man, this is the perfect time. Let's go and talk to this person about joining us. But I think that what it really comes down to is John looks at something and is like, man, I need some help on the research side. Like, we need to be actively thinking about this. And as a group, we try to make sure that we're doing that.
It's tough, right?
Yeah.
So there's no, if I'm understanding what you're saying, it's a conversation that's sort of ongoing.
Yep.
And you try to pick the right, like, okay, we need help. We need help in this area.
Right.
If we're going to continue to grow that area.
No, absolutely. And again, I think, like I said earlier, like, there are a bunch of businesses that have processes that have we are still just 6 guys. We meet every week or we're talking all the time. There are not many days that go by that if John's not in the office, I don't talk to him, or that Sean doesn't talk to him. Like, we are talking constantly and thinking about both where we are and where we might be going. Now, we might not always plan everything perfectly, but I feel like we're talking about it, or at least around it, all the time. And that makes a difference. But I don't think that there's like a revenue number or there's a workload number where you add that next incremental body. It's just kind of like, man, we really need to do something. We need to find someone that we like to help us do that.
Awesome. And that's important too, especially at this stage, to find someone you say that you like, but what I think you're really saying is not only you like them, but they have the same drive, the
Right.
same mentality. They like you, that they're complementary to what's going on.
Right.
Because with 6 people, if you hire number 7 and they're a cancer,
Right.
it can be absolutely horrible.
It can be. And again, so we kind of know there are businesses that scale differently. Again, like a software company that can, like, we need to be way more diverse and we need to do this and that. Like, I don't see us being that way, at least today. I mean, I could be wrong. Like I said, whiteboard, I could erase that tomorrow and be like, but we need, when you see someone that you want to join the firm or to help us get to that next level, like, we do have to think like, hey, will the guys at Wildcat like this guy? Will the guys at NOV like, or gal? Like, if we think that one of our clients would be really upset with this, then we're likely not going to do it.
Sure.
Even if they're like super driven, we really like them. It's like, oh man, if that pisses off this client, we just can't have that.
Well, I mean, to your point, at the end of the day, a lot of what you're doing is selling the people of DEP, right? And who you guys and who the people there represent, what they represent, right?
Yep.
So those things have got to be in concert. So other than the conferences and stuff, what else does DEP do, just so that people know?
Yeah. Look, so
I feel like the office or what is it, office space? What exactly is it?
What is actually you do here? That's it. And there's days that I wonder that, all of us wonder it ourselves. So we've got our weekly research note. And so John and Jeff and Bill or myself or Sean, like, all contribute to that content. And that content kind of drives everything else that we do. And that's the boots on the ground research, where John will go and talk to the guys at Wildcat about what you're seeing in the market. And we then kind of regurgitate that with no names, or go out to Midland and talk to the operators. What are they seeing? How are they seeing on rig prices or trying to make sure that everybody, at least that's a subscriber to DEP, understands kind of the North America land market really well. There's plenty of places to get research with detailed numbers, but you're not going to get that color from anywhere else other than what we're doing. And that color is important because I think that almost everyone that subscribes to a Wood Mackenzie or a Rystad or an Inveris, but a lot of people don't have the ability to take those numbers, put them into context, and understand maybe how to direct their business going forward. And so that weekly note is kind of the basis of everything. Then we do events, the Thrive barbecue. We've got a couple of executive events, and that, again, those kind of add to that research note too, where, well, like you were saying, even a big guy talking on the stage at Thrive, hopefully he can or she can have good nuggets of information that we can pass on to our subscribers about what they're seeing.
Sure.
And that's super important.
And what an opportunity too for you guys. Throw the event, you have this captured audience of executives, and you can entertain them, but also you're having meaningful conversations with all of them.
Right.
It's outstanding.
That content that content is super important to what we do. Again, executives and it being exclusives, super important as well. But like, you look back and like, oh, people aren't just giving platitudes. They're actually trying to get deals done, both on the services side and the operator side, like at our stuff. And that, we want that. We don't want people just sitting there like kicking tires, looking at a valve or looking at whatever and just like kind of walking away. We want them to walk away having learned something. So we've got the research, the events, and then we do a couple of other events, either in Houston or in Midland, again, on the networking side, to make sure that people are talking to their counterparts at either an operator or a service company.
That's great. And so the barbecue has sort of taken on a life of its own. That thing, and I didn't get to go, and I'm upset about that.
Yeah, I don't know why you didn't get to go. Like, there are a lot of Wildcat people there.
I'm definitely, well, I probably could have gone.
Yeah.
Honestly, I just, it was, I'm going to say I didn't get invited, but I probably did get invited, and I just made some reason not to go. But I tell people all the time, Midland is a fantastic place to be from. It's interesting. Midland's so different from when I was raised there now, just because of the way the oil fields changed, and it's been a much more transient workforce than it has been in the past. And so it's a different feel there. But that barbecue, man, that'll make somebody want to go back.
Yeah,
that thing's pretty ridiculous.
It would. And look, we wanted to have it. We wanted to have it in 2020. We were obviously you couldn't, and that's why we did that thing at the. Well,
but you sort of did.
We sort of did. It was just smaller. But yeah, it's turned into a big party. Look, it also helps that oil prices that from the doldrums things have looked up in a big way, and it's a really good opportunity for all of our industry to get together, and for the CEOs of companies to be there, worried about their business, but then also for the young engineers or the guys in the field to be out there as well. Whether you're walking to the Wildcat pit or over to the next tier pit or to ours, walking around seeing everybody. A lot of people are competitors, but they're at this moment like kind of all getting together to celebrate the industry. That's super important, and we definitely thought it was lacking. In a lot of ways, it's lacking in our industry, not because people don't try, but because a lot of outsiders don't care about it as much. And we hope that through Thrive, through the barbecue, that we can kind of help promote the industry as well, because we obviously really like it.
It's been good. It's been good to a lot of us.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I've said this before in other episodes, but the oil and gas industry is such an easy target to be vilified, and it's done more to lift people out of abject poverty around the world than any other industry, and does, I would say, does more to protect the environment than most industries. And people just don't realize that necessarily, but it is what it is.
Right.
It's a great industry full of amazing people that are brilliant at what they do. And how many people were at the barbecue?
Oh man, it was right around 2,300 this year. Man. It was a lot.
That's
and
awesome.
We really, that's another one that's grown from, again, John doing that back in 2007, or was it 2007? I don't remember. Like 2007 with about 50 people in 2 pits to 2,300 people and 70, 80 cooking teams. It's grown into something, and we're really proud of that. Like you talk about the entrepreneurial journey, and there's so many people that help you along the way, and something like that, we could not have done that by ourselves. And there have been a lot of people, again, either supporting or helping us pull it off. It's really fun, and it's nice to be a part of.
The event model is an interesting one too, because you, like you said, there's 6 people at DEP, and you're throwing these massive events, and so you're so reliant on your sponsors doing their part, and so forth. And so, how do you guys mitigate that in terms of a business model when you go into it? Because obviously you've got to put money down to rent a stadium.
Yeah.
There's a lot on the line. How are you mitigating that risk when you go into it, or is there a way to mitigate that risk?
Well, I think the events thing, when we started doing this, we had no real idea how we were going to make money. Like, I want to say the first Thrive, we basically said we are going to try to break even on this thing. That was our goal, was to break even. There's a lot of variable costs when it comes to that type of stuff that you can kind of either have or not. And I'd say the first year we didn't have things because we didn't think that we'd be able to cover the costs. But then as we started figuring out like how to make it work, that's when it's hard to say that we thought about mitigating the risks when we were just kind of like, all right, we need water bottles for this thing, right? Like, we need water. It's Midland. It's the end of September. It's going to be hot. Let's find someone to sponsor the water bottles. at that level of basic, it was like, okay, let's just find someone to sponsor him. And then I think it was Patterson the first year, not this past year that were, and they did it this past year too. We're like, hey, can you guys sponsor? Yes, figure out how much it costs, and we'll sponsor for you. And that literally is the beginning of risk mitigation. And so last year we went bigger because we knew more people wanted to be involved, and we got so many indications from people that they wanted to come and they were willing to pay to come. So we're like, okay, we can have that bigger tent, or we can have it at the stadium because we know people will come.
Yeah,
it doesn't exactly sound like we knew exactly what we were doing, but
but also at the same time, going back to something you said earlier in that explanation, was there were things that we wanted to do that we thought, man, we can't cover that,
right?
And so that's really is risk mitigation, because if you didn't do that, you'd be like, oh, we're doing it anyway, and the next thing you know,
we've also done some things where we're doing it anyway, and we just kind of figure it out later. But no, you're exactly right. Like there are lots of spreadsheets from early on where we're like, okay, if we have this many people, how much do we think this is going to cost? Or all these little things that we started putting together, and a lot of it we just had no idea. We just kind of put our finger up and said, I think it's going to be about this much money. Let's, John's dumb guy math. Just think it's going to be about $20,000 for this. All right, let's go try to cover that cost.
And so wait a second, a finance guy using spreadsheets?
Yeah, exactly. Weird. Not exact. And the funniest thing is not exactly the best versions of Excel either.
Right.
A lot of bad inputs, and just kind of.
Why is this number over here?
Yeah,
just put that as a holder. I just need that number over there for a minute.
Again, sitting in a conference room, you type, I'll look at the screen, and we'll try to make this thing work.
That's hilarious. Well, what's next for DEP for Bill Austin? What's next? Obviously, Thrive is next.
Thrive is next. We're super excited about 2023. All of our subscribers, everyone that's been involved with DEP so far, has been so supportive of us, and we really feel like this is going to be a good year. Knock on wood. We're very excited about this year for DEP. We've got Thrive coming up. We'll do the barbecue again. So those two things, I've already started thinking of them. We are having two kind of executive series, is what we call them. One in Telluride and one in Pebble Beach. That's one that is super expensive, and so many people are interested in joining us. So we're very excited about both of those things. And then we will be in Midland. John's already been in Midland once this year. We will be back at least four more times to talk to all of our people there, and we're just going to keep going.
That's outstanding. So what is something you want to do this year outside of DEP to make Bill a better man?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I think that, like you were saying about being singularly focused on something when you start a business, I think being not that I won't be, that we're not all singularly focused on, we own this business. We want this thing but I guess being open to, stuff for family, just being more open to doing a little bit more from that perspective. I think, but kind of, it's funny. I take a lot of things. My wife gets mad at me for not thinking forward enough and being a little bit better about that. I think if I can do that, I'll be pretty happy.
Man, I think that would make my wife happy if I could pull that off too. Because I've said this. I'm the guy that's she'll say, hey, or I'll tell her I have a meeting on it. I need to schedule a meeting for this day, and she'll go, that's Thanksgiving Day, right? I'm like, oh shit. No, I didn't. I'll do it for the day after. And she's like, the day after? I'm like, yeah, we got stuff to do,
Right.
And so I think, man, that's something that speaks to me for sure. And, and I think all of our wives would be a little happier if we prioritized a bit better.
Yeah, and I do need to work on that. I mean, look, earlier this week, and I'm saying I want to do this. Earlier this week, we had a dinner, and I told her the day before, I was like, oh, I've got this dinner on Wednesday night. She's like, it's not on the family calendar, and we've got this, and this going on that night. I'm like, well, I kind of have to go to this. She was not happy about that. But she has been super understanding about everything, pushed me in the right ways throughout this journey so far. So that's we have come out of COVID and up till now, like just there were touch and go points with this whole thing, but it's been a great journey so far.
Well, man, I hope it continues to be. I know it will be. You got great people over there. The events get bigger every year.
We'll get them to a certain level, and then we're going to stop.
Yeah, I was going to ask that question, if there would ever come a point where you're like, we've got to, because right now the sort of the model of them is it's semi-exclusive, right?
Yeah, no.
And I think that's important to maintain that. But at some point, if it grew too big, it would feel like this is not exclusive in any way.
Well, so that is super important, and I probably should have said that earlier. Like, we kind of view, we want to view. This is the analogy that we use a lot, and Josh helped us with this very early on. Do you want to be the Masters or do you want to be the Phoenix Open? And to use a golf analogy, so we want like Thrive and our executive series. That's the Masters. Like
Right.
That is invite only. There's only so many people that can come to this thing, and we will cap it. Like that is a big thing about what we do is we approve all the people that come. Like so we know who is coming. Our Phoenix Open is the barbecue, and
Right.
both have great pros and cons to all of them. But we do not want Daniel Energy Partners to become more Phoenix Open and less Masters. We want it to be more on the Masters, because a lot of our clients and the CEO types are like, the reason why we stick with you guys is because it's exclusive, and I know I'm not going to get hassled for whatever reason.
Right.
I know the crowd that is coming is going. You guys have essentially vetted it, so that's great.
Right. Yeah. And you're putting the people that I would want to spend time with anyway.
Yep.
In front of me, just as a result of that, and that's very intentional, right? That's
Yeah,
not,
very intentional.
It's not something that you're like, oh, well, we only could get this many people. Now let's just say it's exclusive.
Right.
It was very intentional from the jump.
Yep. Again, John and Sean having that Piper Sandler or Simmons really background, they knew that was important, both from their own perspective and from how we should build this business. And I'm glad we've had moments where we thought we were going to stray from that, and we have not. And it is really good that is very much in the top of our mind when we start doing things. Is like, this is the standard that we hold to this. These are the people that we want to come to this. Make sure that we are sticking to that.
So when you started to stray from it, what brought you back to center?
Well, thankfully, I don't think we ever strayed in like a real public. I think it was amongst ourselves,
Just internal conversation.
and yes, and like I think a lot of that is, hey, you sat around and you're like, well, guess what's gonna happen if we do this, this, and this? It's like, oh, then let's not do that.
Right.
And I think that we're all pretty candid with each other about that type of stuff, and that helps us a lot.
Yeah, just the ability to say the hard truth every once in a while. And
Look, we all have disagreements, and it's funny. Again, now with 6, but when it was 3 and 4, you usually had either 1 or 2 on either end of an argument, and 1 or 2 in the middle. So you had or 1 or 2 that didn't really care, or you're like, I don't know what we're doing, but
mediate.
But then you end up with someone trying to mediate that, which actually ends up pretty good, because even if that person was one more trying to make sure that we bring everyone back to the middle, and sometimes we go with position A or position B, but like as long as we're talking it through, no one's going to say, oh, well, that was your decision. I can't believe you did. No, we all came to that decision. Even if you disagreed with it, you eventually said, let's go with that.
Sure. That's great. And I think that's important for any business, honestly, is to understand what your core competencies are. And if you start to get outside of those, it is critical that you have people around you to say, hey, are you looking at that right?
Yeah.
Are we looking at this thing the right way? Well, man, this has been amazing. I've really enjoyed getting to kind of to hear your story, understand more how you started your life off not even thinking entrepreneurship at all.
Yeah.
But you sort of got there.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see where it goes. Daniel Energy Partners continues to do really, really neat things and do really good things in the industry. And to your point, the information you guys are providing so much of oil and gas, especially oil and gas services, is a feel business.
Yep.
I mean, you can look at all the numbers in the world and all of that, and you can say, yeah, well, we're still not doing well. So
Right.
what's going on? And I think to be able to have a publication or something that you can digest that explains not only the stats, right? But hey, these stats, they could mean this, but we feel like they mean this.
Yep.
Is important. So you guys are doing great work, and just really, really, like I said, appreciate you taking time out of your day to sit down and chat with us. And
Great.
Best of luck to everything in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I mean, we've got our own little podcast too, if anyone ever wants to listen to it. But yeah, I'm really happy to be on this. Thank you very much for having me. We've had a great run. We're continuing it, hopefully in 2023, and it's been a heck of a ride. And we're really thankful with all the support and all the hard work that has gone into this, that we've gotten to this point.
That's outstanding. Well, thanks, Bill. And if there's anything I can ever do for you, please let me know.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll see you at Thrive and at the barbecue.
I'll be at Thrive, and I'm going to make it a point to get to the barbecue
Good.
this year. If I have to drive myself out there and go,
there you go.
to it. So
the drive's always fun. It's not that. It's
the drive from here to Dallas is easy. It's the one from from Dallas to Midland that's it's terrible. So,
Yeah.
But anyway, but thanks again for everything. And like I said, if there's something you need, don't hesitate to ask. And other than that, man, we'll see you at Thrive.
Perfect. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks.